Grandma, they want your money. Sophie's whispered words hung in the dimly lit bedroom, her small face serious in the glow of the nightlight. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. My 9-year-old granddaughter had just shattered my world with 6 simple words. "What did you say, sweetheart?" I finally managed, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden pounding of my heart. Sophie glanced nervously at the door, as if expecting her parents to materialize, despite them supposedly being 500 miles away in Las Vegas. "I wasn't supposed to hear," she continued in that same hushed tone. "I was getting water last night, and they were in Daddy's office. Daddy said you're too old to handle so much money, and they found a special lawyer who could help them get control of everything." I smoothed Sophie's covers, buying myself precious seconds to compose my expression. At 68, I thought I was beyond being blindsided. Yet here I was, knocked sideways by a child's bedtime confession. "That sounds like grown-up business that you don't need to worry about," I said, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'm sure there's some misunderstanding." But even as the words left my mouth, puzzle pieces were clicking into place. Rebecca's sudden increase in visits, Philip's pointed questions about my estate planning, their insistence that I must be overwhelmed managing James's inheritance. 5 years after my husband's death, they'd apparently decided I'd had the money long enough. "Are you mad at them?" Sophie's voice pulled me back to the present, her eyes wide with worry. "No, sweetheart," I lied, tucking her favorite stuffed penguin closer. "Grown-ups sometimes talk about complicated things that sound worse than they are. Nothing for you to worry about." "Promise?" She yawned, her eyelids growing heavy. "I promise. Now it's late, and you have school tomorrow. Sweet dreams, my love." I kissed her forehead and quietly left the room, closing the door behind me. Only then did I allow my mask to slip, my hands trembling as I gripped the hallway banister. Rebecca was my only child, my connection to James, the reason I'd maintained my modest lifestyle despite the millions my husband had left me. I'd never denied her anything, paying for her lavish wedding, helping with the down payment on their oversized house, covering Sophie's private school tuition, writing checks for their constant emergencies without question. I'd done it all willingly, grateful for any attention they deigned to give me, pathetically thankful whenever they remembered to include me in holidays or family photos. I told myself it was normal, that adult children had busy lives, that I shouldn't expect too much. And now this. In the kitchen, I made tea I didn't want, my movements automatic as my mind raced. I wasn't a financial genius like James had been, but I wasn't senile either. I'd managed our household accounts for 40 years of marriage. I balanced my checkbook to the penny each month. I read quarterly statements from the investment firm and asked appropriate questions during my annual reviews. Yet somehow, Rebecca and Philip had convinced themselves I was incompetent, that I needed to be managed like a child. The familiar chime of my phone interrupted my spiraling thoughts. A text from Rebecca. "Hope Sophie isn't giving you any trouble. Our meetings are going great. Philip says this could be life-changing indeed. Have you ever felt that ice-cold shock when someone you love completely betrays your trust? That moment when your world stops turning and everything you thought was true suddenly isn't? If you've experienced that gut-wrenching feeling of betrayal, especially from family, write trust in the comments below. What my daughter and son-in-law didn't realize that night was that they'd made 3 critical mistakes: underestimating me, plotting within earshot of an honest child, and giving me 4 days' notice before they returned home. 4 days that would change everything. I typed back a bland response about Sophie being an angel and asked when they'd return. "Sunday evening," came the reply. 4 more days. Setting my phone down, I moved to the living room window, staring out at the quiet suburban street. The same street where I'd raised Rebecca, where James and I had built our life together. The same house I'd stubbornly refused to leave after his death, despite Rebecca's repeated suggestions that I might be happier in a retirement community. Now I understood why. Returning to the kitchen, I opened the drawer where I kept household paperwork. Behind the neatly organized utility bills and warranty cards was a business card I hadn't looked at in years. Martin Abernathy, Esquire, attorney and the executor of James's will. I hesitated only briefly before reaching for my phone. It was nearly 10 p.m., far too late for a business call, but this wasn't business, this was personal. Eleanor, Martin answered on the third ring, surprise evident in his voice. Is everything all right? I'm not sure, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my tone. But I think I need your help. As I explained what Sophie had overheard, Martin's silence on the other end grew heavier. When I finished, he let out a long breath. Eleanor, if what you're telling me is accurate, this is very serious. We need to meet first thing tomorrow. I can't leave Sophie, I explained. Rebecca and Philip left her with me while they're in Las Vegas. Las Vegas? He repeated flatly. I see. Well, I can come to you then. 9:00 a.m.? That would be after Sophie leaves for school. Perfect. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, my tea long cold, and tried to make sense of it all. The daughter I'd raised, the one I'd sacrificed for, the one I still wrote checks to without question, was actively working to have me declared incompetent, to take control of my assets. For the first time since James died, I felt something other than grief or loneliness stirring within me, something that felt suspiciously like rage. By the time I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, a plan was beginning to form in my mind. Rebecca and Philip had underestimated me, dismissed me as a doddering old woman, too confused to manage her own affairs. They thought I was easy prey. They had no idea what was coming. I paused at Sophie's door, cracking it open to check on her. She slept peacefully, innocent and unaware of the storm brewing around her. My sweet granddaughter, caught between greedy parents and a grandmother she'd tried to warn. In that moment, I made a promise, not just to protect my assets, but to protect Sophie. Whatever I did next would be with her future in mind. I slipped into my own room and opened my laptop, my fingers moving with purpose across the keyboard. By morning, I would have the framework for a plan that would leave Rebecca and Philip with far more than they'd bargained for when they returned from their business trip. They wanted to play games with my inheritance? Fine. Game on. Martin Abernathy arrived precisely at 9 p.m., his silver BMW pulling into my driveway, moments after the school bus disappeared around the corner with Sophie aboard. I'd known Martin for over 40 years. He'd been James's friend before becoming our attorney, had handled our wills, our investments, and ultimately James's estate after the cancer took him. I'd always found comfort in Martin's meticulous nature, his Brooks Brothers suits, and his old-school approach to client relationships. Today, that familiarity was a lifeline. You look well, Eleanor, he said as I ushered him into the living room. His eyes, however, scanned my face with professional assessment, no doubt looking for signs of the cognitive decline my daughter had apparently diagnosed. I'm not senile, Martin, I said dryly, gesturing for him to take a seat. At least not yet. The ghost of a smile crossed his lined face. I never thought you were. James always said you were the sharp one in the relationship. He just had the fancy title and the corner office. I poured coffee from the carafe I'd prepared, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. I need to know what Rebecca and Philip might be planning, legally speaking. Is it even possible for them to take control of my affairs without my consent? Martin accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. Unfortunately, yes. There are several approaches they might take. The most direct would be seeking guardianship or conservatorship, claiming you're no longer capable of managing your affairs. On what grounds? I demanded, indignation rising. I'm perfectly competent. You and I know that, he said gently, but a determined petitioner with financial resources can find experts willing to testify otherwise, especially if they can point to any behaviors that seem unusual or concerning. I thought back over recent months. Had I given them any ammunition, any forgetful moments or confused conversations they could weaponize? They've been encouraging me to simplify my life, I recalled. Rebecca keeps suggesting I sell the house, says it's too much for me to manage, and Philip offered to organize my financial records last month. Martin's expression darkened. Creating a paper trail, making it seem like you've been asking for help, displaying uncertainty. But I haven't, I protested. I've never. I stopped short, a memory surfacing. Except I did let Rebecca help me file my taxes this year. She said their accountant offered to do mine as a favor. Who signed the return? I did, of course. Did you review it carefully first? I hesitated, then admitted the truth. No, I trusted her. Martin set his coffee down with deliberate care. Eleanor, I need to see that return and any other financial documents Rebecca or Philip have helped you with recently. For the next hour, we combed through my files. Martin's expression grew increasingly grave as we discovered discrepancies I'd never noticed. Investment accounts I didn't recognize listed on my tax return. Signatures on documents that resembled mine but weren't quite right. Statements addressed to me that I'd never seen. They've been laying groundwork, Martin finally said, organizing the suspicious documents into a separate pile, creating a paper trail of financial confusion, possibly even fabricating evidence of poor decision-making. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my coffee. How long do you think they've been planning this based on these documents? At least 8 months. He met my eyes directly. Eleanor, I have to ask, have you updated your will since James died? No, I admitted. I meant to, but Rebecca was your only child, your natural heir, so it didn't seem urgent. He finished for me. That's what they're counting on. A wave of nausea swept through me. My own daughter, my only child, planning to have me declared incompetent, to seize control of my assets, all while smiling to my face and leaving their child in my care. What do we do? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Martin straightened his tie, a gesture I recognized from courtroom days. First, we document everything. Create a clear record of your current cognitive state and financial acumen. I'll arrange for evaluations with independent medical and psychological experts. Then we prepare a counter strategy. If they want to play hardball, Eleanor, we need to be ready. His confidence steadied me. What about my will? Should we update it now? Absolutely. In fact, I brought the paperwork with me. He patted his briefcase. I had a feeling you might want to make some changes. After Martin left, armed with copies of the suspicious documents and a plan to return the following day with a doctor and financial examiner, I stood in my kitchen feeling strangely energized. The initial shock and hurt were giving way to something more productive: determination. I picked up my phone and made 2 more calls. First to my bank, to place holds on all my accounts, requiring in-person verification for any transactions over $1,000, and second to a private investigator Martin had recommended, Sullivan Investigations. A brisk female voice answered. "This is Eleanor Sullivan," I said. "Martin Abernathy suggested I call. I need someone to track my daughter and son-in-law's activities in Las Vegas." "What kind of activities are we talking about, Mrs. Sullivan?" "They told me they're there for business meetings. I have reason to believe they're actually consulting with an attorney about seizing control of my assets. I need confirmation, and I need it quickly. There was a pause, then. I can have someone on this within the hour. We have associates in Las Vegas. Would you like audio surveillance, if possible? I hesitated only briefly. Yes, whatever is legal. I need to know exactly what they're planning. After providing Rebecca and Philip's information and hotel details, I hung up and looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd made Rebecca's school lunches, where I'd taught her to bake cookies, where we'd sat together after James's funeral, holding hands in shared grief. How had we come to this? The sound of the school bus pulling up outside snapped me from my thoughts. I quickly tucked away the scattered papers on the table and composed myself. Sophie would be home, and she mustn't suspect anything was wrong. As my granddaughter bounded through the door, backpack swinging, I greeted her with a genuine smile. Whatever was happening with Rebecca and Philip, Sophie was innocent. She was also, I was beginning to realize, my most important consideration in whatever came next. "How was school, sweetheart?" I asked, helping her with her jacket. "Good. We're studying the solar system, and I got picked to be Jupiter in our class model because I knew all the moons." Her excitement was contagious, her earlier worry apparently forgotten. "That's wonderful. Jupiter is the biggest planet, you know. Very important." "That's what Ms. Winter said. Can we make cookies? I told Emily about your chocolate chip cookies, and she didn't believe they're the best in the world." "We certainly can," I agreed, reaching for my apron. "And maybe we can make a few extra for you to take to school tomorrow." As we measured flour and cracked eggs, I watched Sophie's concentrated expression, so reminiscent of Rebecca at that age. My granddaughter was the one pure thing in this mess, the one person whose motives I didn't question. The next morning, I was already awake when my phone rang at 5:30 a.m. I slipped out of bed and hurried downstairs to answer it, not wanting to wake Sophie. "Mrs. Sullivan, Kate Harper from Sullivan Investigations." I clutched the phone tighter. "Yes, I'm here. We have the recordings you requested. I apologize for the early hour, but given the time sensitivity, I thought you'd want to know immediately." "You were right. What did you find?" "Your daughter and son-in-law met with an attorney named Gregory Winters yesterday. He specializes in conservatorships and estate planning. We have approximately 40 minutes of clear audio from their consultation." My free hand gripped the kitchen counter. "And? Mrs. Sullivan, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I rarely offer personal opinions, but..." She paused. "You need to hear this for yourself. The content is difficult." "I understand. How soon can you get it to me?" "I can email the audio files within the hour, along with photos documenting their movements and meetings." After thanking her and ending the call, I made coffee with shaking hands. By the time Sophie came downstairs for breakfast, I had composed myself enough to make her favorite French toast and help her practice her spelling words. The moment the school bus pulled away, I opened my laptop and clicked on the audio files Kate had sent. Rebecca's voice filled my kitchen, clear as if she were sitting across from me. "We're concerned about her mental state. She's becoming increasingly forgetful, making poor financial decisions. Last month she gave $3,000 to a telephone charity that was clearly a scam." A lie. I'd never done any such thing. Philip's voice next. "The house is falling apart around her. She forgets to pay bills. We're worried about her safety, but she refuses to consider assisted living." More lies. Then the attorney, Winters. "Based on what you've described, we have grounds for an emergency conservatorship petition. Once granted, you'll have control over her finances and healthcare decisions. We can move quickly, especially if you're prepared with documentation of her decline." "We are," Rebecca assured him. "We've been keeping records for months." "What about the granddaughter, the one she's watching now?" "Sophie?" Philip replied. That's another concern. Eleanor is becoming unreliable as a caretaker. We've been looking into boarding schools, actually. There's an excellent one in Switzerland that has an opening for next fall. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile floor. Switzerland? They plan to send Sophie away? My precious grandchild who loved science and cookies and spent every weekend with me. I forced myself to keep listening as they discussed selling my house, liquidating investments, even which assisted living facility would be suitable, all while I was still completely healthy and independent. By the time the recording ended, hot tears streaked my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fury. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my life, my home, my relationship with Sophie. Martin arrived at Tenouille with Dr. Elaine Chen, a neurologist, and Frederick Wilson, a forensic accountant. For the next several hours, I submitted to cognitive tests, financial competency assessments, and detailed interviews. Mrs. Sullivan, Dr. Chen said finally, reviewing her notes. Based on my examination, you show absolutely no signs of cognitive impairment. Your memory, reasoning, and executive function are all excellent, especially for someone your age. I could have told you that, I said dryly. She smiled. And now you have an independent medical opinion to back it up. Mr. Wilson was equally direct. Your financial records demonstrate consistent, prudent management. You've maintained balanced accounts, made reasonable investment decisions, and show clear understanding of your assets and obligations. There is zero evidence of financial confusion or mismanagement. Martin nodded with satisfaction. We'll have formal reports from both of them by tomorrow. Now, let's discuss your will. By noon, I had signed a new will removing Rebecca and Philip as beneficiaries, establishing a trust for Sophie that they couldn't access, and naming Martin as executor. I'd also granted medical power of attorney to my sister-in-law, Catherine, who lived in Boston, someone I knew I could trust. What about the house? I asked Martin. Can they force me to sell it? Not if you're legally competent, which we've now documented you are. I want new locks, I decided, and a security system. Martin nodded. I'll make the arrangements this afternoon. After they left, I walked through my home with new eyes, taking inventory of everything Rebecca and Philip might consider valuable. Family silver, artwork James had collected, my jewelry, including my mother's diamond earrings that Rebecca had always admired. I made a list, then called Sophie's school and arranged to pick her up early. We're going on a treasure hunt, I told her when she climbed into my car, her face lighting up with excitement. A real one? With a map and everything? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. Even better, we're going to find all the special treasures in Grandma's house and make sure they're safe. The treasure hunt with Sophie became a game that filled our afternoon. We gathered family heirlooms, photographs, and valuables, with me telling stories about each item as we carefully packed them into boxes. This silver teapot belonged to your great-great-grandmother, I explained, wrapping it in soft cloth. She brought it from England in 1892. Sophie's eyes widened. That's so old. Did Mom play with it when she was little? Not play, but she helped me polish it sometimes. I hesitated, memories of a younger Rebecca sitting at this same table, carefully applying silver polish, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Your mom loved hearing stories about our family, too. We continued through the house, collecting items that held both monetary and sentimental value. I was careful to frame it as an adventure rather than a defensive measure, and Sophie approached it with the enthusiasm only a 9-year-old could muster. What do we do with everything now? She asked when we'd finished, surveying our collection. Tomorrow we're going on a special trip to the bank. Have you ever seen inside a bank vault? She shook her head. eyes bright with anticipation. Well, that's where treasure really belongs, safe and protected. The next morning, I called Sophie's school to explain she'd be late, then drove us to First National Bank, where I'd been a customer for 40 years. Mr. Patterson, the manager, greeted us personally. Mrs. Sullivan, always a pleasure. And who's this young lady? This is my granddaughter, Sophie. We have some important business today. He smiled at Sophie. Well, important business deserves special attention. Would you like to see something few people ever get to see? Sophie nodded eagerly, and he led us through a heavy door into the vault area. After showing Sophie the massive mechanism that secured the vault door, he helped us transfer our treasures into a new safety deposit box. Only people with the right key and password can open this box, he explained to Sophie. It's one of the safest places in the city. While Sophie was distracted by the rows of metal boxes, I quietly arranged with Mr. Patterson to update the access protocols on all my accounts, requiring multi-factor authentication for any transactions. And I'd like to open a new account, I added in a low voice, one that's not connected to any of my existing accounts. He nodded discreetly. I'll handle that personally. As we left the bank, Sophie tugged my hand. Grandma, why are we putting all your special things in the bank? Is something wrong? Her perception startled me. I'd tried to make our activities seem like games, but children sense more than we give them credit for. I knelt to her level in the parking lot. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart, but sometimes grown-ups need to organize things differently. The bank is the best place for special items to stay safe. She studied my face, not entirely convinced. Does this have something to do with what I told you? About Mom and Dad talking about your money? My heart clenched. It's all just grown-up business, Sophie. Nothing for you to worry about. But you're not mad at them, right? You promised. I took a deep breath. I'm not mad. I'm just making some changes to how I organize things. Now, how about we go for ice cream before I take you to school? Her face brightened immediately. For breakfast? It'll be our secret, I winked. That evening, I took Sophie to her favorite restaurant, an Italian place where the waiters knew her by name and always brought extra garlic knots to our table. This is just like my birthday, she exclaimed as we shared a massive plate of spaghetti. Every day with you is special, I told her, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. Over dessert, I casually mentioned, I've been thinking about taking a trip during your spring break. How would you feel about visiting the mountains? The mountains? Where we could see snow? Really? Her excitement was palpable. Really? I've already talked to your school, and they said it would be fine for you to miss a few extra days. Have you asked Mom and Dad yet? I kept my smile steady. Not yet. I thought I'd surprise them when they get home. After dinner, while Sophie was getting ready for bed, I continued my preparations. I emptied spaces where valuable items had been, making their absence obvious. I changed the locks on all exterior doors and activated the new security system Martin had arranged. I placed a note on the kitchen counter. Welcome home. Things have changed. We need to talk. With everything in place, I went upstairs to tuck Sophie in. Grandma, will you tell me the story about how you met Grandpa again? The one where he spilled coffee all over your new dress? I smiled, settling onto the edge of her bed. Of course, but first, I need to talk to you about something important. She sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Our bank adventure today and all the changes we've been making around the house, those need to stay just between us for now, like a special secret mission. Why? She asked, her forehead wrinkling with confusion. Because sometimes grown-ups need to surprise other grown-ups. It's not about keeping bad secrets, but about waiting for the right time to explain things. Sophie considered this, then nodded solemnly. I can keep our mission secret. Thank you, sweetheart. I tucked her covers around her. Now, about that story. It was my first day working at the library, and this handsome young man with glasses too big for his face came rushing in with a stack of engineering books. As I told the familiar story, I felt a calm determination settle over me. In 2 days, Rebecca and Philip would return to a very different situation than the one they'd left. They thought they'd planned for everything. They hadn't planned for me. Sunday evening arrived with the rumble of tires on the driveway. I stood at the kitchen window watching Rebecca and Philip unload their luggage from their luxury SUV. Their animated conversation stopped abruptly when Philip tried his key in the front door and found it wouldn't work. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and moved to the entryway. Through the frosted glass, I could see their confused silhouettes. Philip tried his key again, jiggling it forcefully. After letting them struggle for another moment, I opened the door. "Mom!" Rebecca's surprise quickly shifted to confusion. "Why doesn't our key work?" "Because I changed the locks," I replied calmly, stepping aside to let them enter. "Welcome home." They exchanged glances as they wheeled their luggage into the foyer. Philip's expression darkened when he noticed the empty spot where an antique hall mirror had hung for decades. "Is everything okay?" Rebecca asked, her voice carefully modulated. "Where's the mirror that was here?" "Sophie's upstairs in her room," I said, ignoring her question. "Why don't you go up and say hello? She's missed you." Rebecca hesitated, clearly thrown off balance by my demeanor, but then nodded and headed upstairs. Philip remained, his eyes scanning the living room, noting each empty space where valuable items had been. "Eleanor," he began in the patronizing tone I'd grown to hate, "has something happened while we were gone? You seem different." "Many things have happened," I agreed. "Sophie will be occupied with Rebecca for a few minutes. That gives us time to talk before we all sit down together." I gestured toward the dining room, where I'd arranged the evidence of their betrayal on the polished mahogany table that had been my grandmother's. Family dinner conversations had once filled this room with laughter. Tonight would be different. Philip followed me reluctantly, his confident swagger diminishing with each empty space he passed. When he saw the table, the photos of him and Rebecca entering Gregory Winter's law office, the transcripts of their conversations, the falsified financial documents they'd created, he froze. "What is this?" His voice had lost its usual smoothness. "This," I said, tapping the stack of papers, "is what you and Rebecca have been planning for the past 8 months. Your attempt to have me declared incompetent. Your scheme to seize control of my assets. Your plans to sell my home and place me in an institution." His face drained of color. "Eleanor, I can explain. Can you also explain why you plan to send Sophie to boarding school in Switzerland?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. Rebecca's voice came from the doorway. "Sophie's watching her favorite show. She says you two had quite the adventure while we were—" Her words died as she saw the dining room table, her husband's ashen face, and my unwavering stare. "Mom," she began, her voice climbing an octave. "What's all this?" "Your itinerary in Las Vegas?" I replied. "Not exactly the business meetings you described, were they?" She stepped closer, recognition dawning as she saw the photographs and transcripts. "You had us followed? Recorded? Is that even legal?" "Perfectly legal. Just like it's legal for me to change my will, secure my assets, and document my mental competence with independent medical professionals." "You've misunderstood," Philip attempted, regaining some composure. "We were exploring options for your protection. For your own good." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "My protection? Was it for my protection that you planned to declare me incompetent? for my own good that you intended to control my money and sell my home? Rebecca stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. Mom, please. You're twisting everything. We're worried about you living alone, managing all this. She gestured around the room. It's too much for someone your age. Stop, I said quietly. The time for lies has passed. I have recordings of your conversations with Gregory Winters. Every word, Rebecca, every plan, every lie you told about my mental state and financial decisions. Philip moved to the table, frantically scanning the transcripts. This is an invasion of privacy, he blustered. You can't just spy on private conversations. Yet you plan to take over my private life without my knowledge or consent. Rebecca collapsed into a chair. What have you done with the silver, the artwork, your jewelry? Secured, along with documentation of every item's provenance and value. I took a seat at the head of the table. You both seem more concerned about possessions than about the fact that I know you betrayed me. We didn't betray, Rebecca began, but I cut her off. You absolutely did. My own daughter. My voice finally broke. My only child. The one person I thought I could always trust. Grandma? Sophie's small voice came from the hallway. Is everything okay? I heard loud voices. We all turned to see her standing uncertainly in the doorway, clutching her stuffed penguin. Rebecca quickly wiped her eyes. Everything's fine, honey. Grown-up talk. Go back to your show, okay? Sophie ignored her mother, coming to stand beside my chair. Are you fighting because of the money? Because of what I told Grandma? The silence that followed was deafening. Philip's jaw actually dropped. What did you tell Grandma, sweetheart? Rebecca asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Sophie looked up at me, uncertain. I nodded encouragingly. I told her I heard you and Daddy talking about taking Grandma's money, about how she's too old to have so much money. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Sophie, that was a private conversation. You misunderstood. I don't think she misunderstood at all, I said gently. Children often hear more than adults realize. Is that why you were talking about boarding school? Sophie continued, her innocent question landing like a grenade. I don't want to go to Switzerland. I want to stay with you and Grandma. Philip's eyes darted to Rebecca in panic. Neither seemed capable of formulating a response. I placed a protective arm around Sophie's shoulders. No one is sending you anywhere you don't want to go. Why don't you go upstairs and get ready for bed? I'll be up soon to say good night. After Sophie reluctantly left, I turned back to my daughter and son-in-law. Here's what happens now. I've documented everything. My new will excludes both of you entirely. I've secured my accounts, my property, and all valuables. You can't do this, Philip protested weakly. I already have. I pushed a folder toward them. These are my non-negotiable terms. You have two options. Accept them and begin rebuilding some semblance of trust, or reject them and face the consequences, including potential criminal charges for the financial documents you forged. Rebecca opened the folder with trembling hands. As she read, her expression shifted from defiance to shock to defeat. This is everything, she whispered. You're cutting us off completely. Not completely. You're still Sophie's parents. I still want a relationship with all of you, but it will be on my terms, with clear boundaries and with the understanding that trust must be earned. Philip read over her shoulder, his face growing increasingly pale. These restrictions, this monitoring of our finances, you're treating us like children. No, I corrected him. I'm treating you like adults who attempted to commit fraud. The consequences could be much worse. Rebecca looked up, tears streaming down her face. And if we refuse? Then you'll leave this house tonight. My attorney will contact you regarding the criminal and civil actions we'll pursue, and I'll petition for guardianship of Sophie, with extensive documentation of your plans to ship her off to Switzerland against her will." Philip's hands clenched into fists. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." My voice was steel. "You've shown me exactly what you're capable of. Now I'm showing you who I really am." The next 3 days passed in a fog of tense meals and strained conversations. Rebecca and Philip stayed in my guest room, as stipulated in my terms, giving us all time to establish new boundaries and begin addressing the damage they'd caused. Sophie sensed the tension, but seemed relieved that everything was in the open. She spent hours showing her parents her school projects and telling them about our adventures while they were gone, carefully avoiding any mention of our bank visit or the missing valuables. On the second morning, I found Philip alone in the kitchen, staring into his coffee cup as if it held answers. "Your terms," he said without looking up. "They're basically financial probation." "Yes," I agreed, pouring my own coffee. "That's exactly what they are." He finally met my gaze. "We never meant for you to find out this way." "You never meant for me to find out at all," I corrected him. "That was the point of the whole scheme." Philip had always been the practical one, the numbers person in their marriage. Even now, I could see him calculating, weighing options, looking for leverage. "We can't survive on our current income alone," he finally admitted. "Not with the house, the country club membership, Sophie's school." "I'm aware of your financial situation. I've seen the mortgage statements, the credit card bills, the investment losses you've been hiding from Rebecca." His head snapped up. "How did you—" "I had a very thorough financial investigation conducted. You've been living beyond your means for years, using my generosity to fill the gaps." He sagged in his chair. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. When we got married, I promised Rebecca a certain kind of life, the kind she grew up with. And when that proved more expensive than your income could support, you decided taking my money was the solution." I kept my voice even, free of the accusation he deserved. "I just wanted to give her everything." "Except honesty," I observed. The conversation with Rebecca, later that afternoon, was more emotional and less practical. "I don't understand how we got here," she sobbed as we sat in the garden, away from Philip and Sophie. "I never thought of it as betrayal. I thought we were helping you. By declaring me incompetent, by planning to sell my home and move me to an institution, by taking control of the money your father worked his entire life to earn." She wiped her eyes. "It sounds awful when you say it like that." "Because it is awful," I replied. "If you needed money, you could have simply asked me. I've never denied you anything." "But that's just it," she whispered. "I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to need you." I studied my daughter, trying to reconcile the woman before me with the little girl I'd raised. "So, instead, you decided to take." "We lost perspective," she admitted. "The more we talked about it, the more it seemed justified. Philip said it was inevitable anyway, that we were just accelerating the timeline." On the third day, they packed their bags and returned to their own home, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Without my financial support, they would need to make significant changes to their lifestyle. The first call came barely a week later. Rebecca, her voice tight with controlled panic, explaining that they couldn't make their mortgage payment. "I understand your situation," I said calmly, "but as we discussed, I won't be providing direct financial assistance anymore." "But Mom, we could lose the house." "Perhaps you should consider downsizing," I suggested. "Many families live comfortably in homes much smaller than yours." The silence on the other end told me this idea had never occurred to her. Over the following weeks, I watched from a distance as they began dismantling the life they'd built on the expectation of my money. The country club membership was canceled. Philip's luxury car was replaced with something more practical. They held a garage sale that emptied much of their designer furniture. When Rebecca called to ask if she could sell some of the family silver I'd given her years ago, I recognized it as a small step toward accountability. Actually, I said, I have a different proposal. Instead of selling family heirlooms, I'd be willing to provide an advance against your eventual inheritance. An advance? Hope crept into her voice. Yes, but with conditions. Martin will draw up the paperwork. The amount would be deducted from whatever you might eventually inherit, and it would come with spending restrictions and financial counseling requirements. Like a trust fund, she said, a note of irony in her voice. Exactly like that. The very thing you planned to do to me, but with your informed consent. She was quiet for a moment. We're trying, Mom. We really are. I know, I said, softening slightly. That's why I'm offering this alternative. We established new routines for Sophie. Instead of staying with me whenever Rebecca and Philip wanted free time, there was a regular schedule, alternating weekends and Wednesday afternoons. Each visit was planned and purposeful, no longer treated as free childcare. The first time Rebecca and Philip came to pick Sophie up from a weekend stay, I noticed something different. Their designer clothes had been replaced with simpler attire. The ostentatious jewelry Rebecca usually wore was absent. Philip's constant checking of his phone had ceased. We sold the big house, Rebecca said, as Sophie gathered her things. We're moving to a townhouse next month. It's smaller, but it's in Sophie's school district, so she won't have to change schools. I nodded, noting the hint of relief in her voice. How do you feel about it? Honestly, scared, but also lighter somehow, like we can finally stop pretending. For the first time since this all began, I saw a glimmer of the daughter I'd raised, the one who valued honesty and hard work before money and status consumed her priorities. Sophie's excited about having a smaller yard to take care of, Philip added, a touch of genuine humor in his voice. She says less yard means more time for science experiments. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca hesitated in the doorway. We're seeing a financial counselor next week. Part of your terms. I thought it would be humiliating, but it's actually helpful. I'm glad to hear that, I said, genuine warmth in my voice for the first time in weeks. And Mom? She met my eyes directly. We were wrong, so wrong. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I want you to know we understand that now. It wasn't an elaborate apology. It wasn't even complete, but it was honest, and for now, that was enough to nurture the fragile seed of reconciliation beginning to take root. Spring break arrived with a flurry of activity. Sophie burst through my door with her overstuffed backpack, chattering excitedly about our mountain adventure. Mom packed my new snow boots, and Dad got me a special camera for taking pictures of animals. Can we really stay in a cabin with a fireplace? I laughed, helping her with her luggage. Yes, and it has the most beautiful view of the mountains you've ever seen. Rebecca hovered in the doorway, a new hesitancy in her demeanor. Gone was the entitled confidence, replaced by something more genuine. I packed her medication and vitamins, she said, handing me a small bag. And extra gloves because she always loses one. Thank you, I replied, accepting both the bag and the small olive branch it represented. We'll video chat every evening, Philip added from behind her, but only if it works with your schedule. This deference to my plans was new. 3 months ago, they would have demanded daily calls on their timeline. The 5-hour drive to the mountains gave Sophie and me time for conversations that meandered through science facts, favorite songs, and increasingly thoughtful questions. Grandma, are you still mad at Mom and Dad? She asked as we wound through a particularly scenic stretch of road. I chose my words carefully. I was hurt by some choices they made, but we're all working on making things better. She nodded, absorbing this. They argue less now, and Dad doesn't talk on his phone during dinner anymore. That sounds like a good change. Yeah, and Mom makes pancakes on Saturdays now, even though they're not as good as yours. She paused, looking out at the snow-capped peaks emerging on the horizon. I think they're happier in the smaller house. Children see more than we give them credit for. The cabin exceeded even my expectations. Rustic charm blended with modern comforts, surrounded by pine trees and breathtaking mountain vistas. Sophie ran from window to window, gasping at each new view. Can we go explore right now? Please, please, please. How could I refuse? We bundled up against the spring mountain chill and spent the afternoon discovering trails, identifying wildlife tracks, and building our first snowman of the trip. That evening, warm by the fire with mugs of hot chocolate, we video called Rebecca and Philip. Their faces filled the tablet screen, both smiling at Sophie's animated recounting of our day's adventures. And then we saw real deer tracks. Grandma says tomorrow we might see actual deer if we get up early enough. I watched their reactions carefully. Instead of the distracted nodding they would have offered months ago, they asked questions, laughed at Sophie's jokes, and seemed genuinely present in the conversation. When Sophie ran off to organize her wildlife photos, Rebecca's expression turned more serious. How are you, Mom? Really? The question caught me off guard with its sincerity. I'm good, I replied truthfully. Better than I expected to be, given everything that's happened. Philip leaned forward slightly. We've been talking a lot about what we did, what we almost threw away. His voice caught. Thank you for this time with Sophie. We know we haven't earned your trust back yet. The simplicity of his acknowledgement moved me more than any elaborate apology could have. One day at a time, I said gently. Our mountain week passed in a blur of snowball fights, wildlife spotting, board games by the fire, and long conversations under star-filled skies. Sophie thrived in the focused attention, her natural curiosity blossoming with each new discovery. On our last evening, as we roasted marshmallows for s'mores, she made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. Mom and Dad seem different lately, she said, carefully rotating her marshmallow over the flames. Dad doesn't talk about being rich anymore, and Mom doesn't get sad when she can't buy new things. And how do you feel about those changes? I asked. She considered this seriously, her face golden in the firelight. I like it. Dad plays chess with me now, and Mom is teaching me to cook. Her marshmallow caught fire, and she quickly blew it out. Perfect, extra crispy. As we drove home the following day, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. The betrayal still stung when I allowed myself to dwell on it, but something had shifted. Perhaps it was the clear mountain air, or Sophie's uncomplicated perspective, or simply the passage of time, but I found myself open to the possibility of genuine reconciliation. Rebecca and Philip were waiting when we pulled into my driveway. Sophie launched herself from the car into their arms, a tangle of excited hugs and breathless stories. Can we show Grandma our new house today? Please, she begged. I want to show her my science corner. Rebecca glanced at me questioningly. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Their new townhouse was indeed modest, perhaps a third the size of their previous home. But what struck me most was the feeling of authenticity that pervaded the space. Gone were the showpiece furnishings and status symbols. In their place were comfortable, well-used pieces that invited relaxation rather than careful admiration. Sophie dragged me to her room, proudly showing off the science laboratory they'd created in one corner, complete with microscope, rock collection, and carefully labeled specimens. Dad built these shelves specially for my collections, she explained, touching the simple wooden structures with reverence. Later, after Sophie had exhausted herself, showing me every detail of her new domain, Rebecca made tea and joined me at their small kitchen table. "It's not what we imagined," she admitted, looking around the modest space, "but it's what we needed." Philip pulled up a chair. "We've been seeing a family therapist, learning to talk about what's real instead of what we want people to think is real." "That can't be easy," I acknowledged. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "We lost ourselves, Mom, somewhere between wanting success and fearing failure. We became people I don't recognize. And the worst part," Philip added quietly, "is that we nearly destroyed our family in the process." "But you didn't," I reminded them. Rebecca reached tentatively for my hand. "We'd like to try again. Not as the people we were pretending to be, but as who we really are. Flawed, still learning, but honest." "I can work with honest," I said, squeezing her hand. We established new traditions in the months that followed. Sunday dinners at my house, where all 3 generations cooked together. Monthly financial check-ins, where Rebecca and Philip shared their progress with transparent vulnerability. Weekend outings, where status and appearance took a back seat to genuine connection. Trust rebuilt slowly in small moments of truth and accountability. When Philip received a job offer with a higher salary but more travel requirements, he declined it after a family discussion about priorities. When Rebecca was tempted by an expensive purchase, she called me to talk through whether it aligned with their new values. There were setbacks, of course. Old habits resurfaced during moments of stress. Hurt feelings occasionally flared as we navigated our new reality. But underneath it all was a foundation of honesty that hadn't existed before. One evening, as Rebecca helped me clean up after dinner, while Philip and Sophie played chess in the living room, she paused, dish towel in hand. "I keep waiting for you to throw it all back in my face," she confessed, "to remind me of what we did. I would if I were you." I considered this as I rinsed the last plate. What purpose would that serve? You're already holding yourself accountable. Adding my recriminations would only push us backward. "How did you get so wise?" she asked with a small smile. "I had 68 years to practice," I replied, "and I made plenty of mistakes along the way, just different ones than yours." Later that evening, as I watched Sophie's determined concentration over the chessboard, I felt a deep contentment settle over me. The inheritance that mattered most wasn't in bank accounts or safety deposit boxes. It was here, in this room, in the values being lived and lessons being learned. Sophie looked up and caught my eye, offering a brilliant smile before returning to her strategic planning. In that moment, I knew with certainty that she would inherit something far more valuable than money, the knowledge that mistakes, even terrible ones, need not define us forever. That honesty, accountability, and forgiveness could rebuild what betrayal had broken. And that, perhaps, was the greatest inheritance of all. It's been 18 months since Sophie's whispered warning changed everything. 18 months of pain, growth, forgiveness, and rebuilding. The question people ask most when I share this story is whether I've truly forgiven Rebecca and Philip. The answer isn't simple. Forgiveness isn't a single moment or decision. It's a daily choice, a conscious effort to move forward rather than remain trapped in hurt and anger. I won't pretend the betrayal doesn't still sting when I allow myself to remember the recordings, the plans they made, the calculated way they prepared to take over my life, but I choose not to dwell there. Instead, I focus on the family we've become. More honest, more direct, more authentic in both our struggles and our joys. The facade of perfection has crumbled, replaced by something sturdier, reality, with all its flaws and complications. Rebecca and Philip have changed in ways I never expected. Their downsized life has led to upgraded values. They talk openly with Sophie about financial decisions, teaching her that worth isn't measured by possessions or status. They volunteer at a local shelter, giving time instead of just writing checks. Philip started coaching Sophie's science club, discovering a talent for connecting with children that had been buried beneath career ambition. The true measure of our wealth was never in bank accounts or property deeds. It was in the courage to face hard truths, the strength to demand better from ourselves and each other, and the wisdom to recognize that second chances must be earned, not given. If you face betrayal from those you trusted most, I want you to know two things. First, you have every right to protect yourself, to establish boundaries, to require accountability. And second, healing is possible, not through blind forgiveness that ignores wrongdoing, but through the harder path of honest reckoning and genuine change. Did my story resonate with you today? Have you experienced the painful shock of discovering someone you loved was not who you thought they were? Share your experience in the comments below. If you found value in this journey from betrayal to empowerment, please hit the like button and consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles with family betrayal or financial manipulation. Subscribe to our channel for more real stories about family dynamics, establishing healthy boundaries, and navigating complex relationships. Hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss our upcoming series on recognizing manipulation tactics and building resilience against emotional control. Remember, your story isn't over when betrayal happens. Sometimes it's just beginning.